I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what's trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne, great to be with you.
Let's start with two big announcements from Canada's two biggest grocers. Loblaw says it's freezing prices for 1,500 no-name products, and rival Metro says it's not accepting cost increases from suppliers over a 3-month period. All this to keep grocery prices stable this holiday season. Is this legit, Brett, or is it, as some critics suggest, a PR move?
Well, it depends how you look at the issue. So if you talk to Loblaws, they say that the increase in food prices over the past few months and past year have been primarily because of increased supplier costs. So this could be everything from the conflict in Ukraine to supply chain challenges. But overall, they just say that everything is just more expensive. However, they are also bringing in record profits, which leads a lot of people to think that perhaps there's some price gouging going on. Now, there is a parliamentary inquiry going on into this, and they've responded by saying that they're not going to increase prices on no-name products. But Metro did come back and say that that's standard practice for this time of year. So there's a lot of different narratives going on right now.
Yeah, and I think one important thing to look at, to really examine, will be the grocers' margins. Yes, revenue has increased, but what about the profitability aspect of it when you look at margins? I think overall this story highlights an important factor fueling inflation in Canada, and that is the proliferation of monopolies, duopolies, and oligopolies. When we have a handful or even less of dominant players, and you see that everywhere, telecom, airlines, groceries, banks, I could go on and on and on. It seems to be the Canadian way. And this lack of real competition leads to higher prices, in some cases the highest prices for these types of goods and services compared to other peer countries. Brett?
Absolutely. When you only have a very limited number of options, whether it be 3 major grocers or 3 major telcos or 5 big banks, what happens is that there might not be formal colluding. They're not sitting down and saying, these are the prices that we're going to set. That would be illegal. But there are levels that are being set by each of them, floors and ceilings as to how much things should cost. And everyone's just looking at each other and they're pricing it pretty similarly. And that works all in all of their best interest. Now, if you look to a market like the US, where you have significantly more competition, you have less chance of that happening. So it's definitely exacerbating the inflation issue in Canada. And it's something that really needs to be looked at by regulators.
Yeah, and I have a feeling we'll come back to this topic time and again. Let's switch gears. I'm pretty focused on Halloween, but apparently 'tis the season to already start talking about holiday shopping. Deloitte's 2022 Holiday Retail Outlook forecasts a 17% drop in holiday spending to $1,520 per household. That seems a tad low, but that's probably because I have kids. This has to do with rising interest rates and also households being worried about the possibility of a recession, and because of that, cutting back on spending. What do you make of all this, Brett?
Well, in the economics community, there's a constant debate over whether or not we're in a recession or not. And there's been economic decline, but at the same time, employment remains high. I think this survey and these types of consumer surveys are probably the best barometers and indicators as to whether or not we're in a recession. And what this is showing is that people are just feeling it on the ground now, that Main Street is now beginning to feel the impacts of what we've seen on Wall Street and Bay Street, which is the decline of financial stocks. Now we're also seeing it on Main Street, and families across the country are lowering their budgets and reducing the amount of spending overall to in preparation or in advance of what they believe will be some sort of broader economic downturn. And that's going to have a big impact on their wallets and how much they spend this holiday season.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, just based on the way that inflation works, and certainly inflation at these levels, multi-decade highs, Main Street has felt all of this first. They're feeling it, prices at the pumps, at the grocery store, and just about everywhere else in between. Before we go on, though, I should ask, Brett, are you a last-minute holiday shopper, or do you buy well in advance?
That's a great question. I think when I was younger, I was very last minute, but now I'm trying to change my ways. And like many of the shoppers in the surveys who said that they plan to buy before Black Friday, I also hope to do that. And so I am trying now to listen for hints from my friends, my family, and my partner to try and figure out what do they want so I can get ahead of the whole thing. Because every time I've left it to the last minute, it always works out for the worse. That's for sure.
I hope others are listening, including my husband, whose MO is pretty much last minute, December 24th. I'm 0% kidding. And apparently a good strategy this year is to shop early and hunt for deals. A lot of retailers were forced to hang on to holiday items they were supposed to get last year, but because of the supply chain crisis, it delayed shipments. Bottom line, going out and shopping earlier is much better this year, maybe more so than any other year before. So I think you're onto something. Let's talk about let's not talk about billionaires, rather. We talk about billionaires a fair bit. Let's change our tune a little bit and focus on centi-millionaires, because apparently that's a thing, and they outnumber billionaires by 10 to 1. And this threshold has changed. In the late 90s, you needed to have 30 million, I believe, in investable assets to be in this club. Nowadays, because of asset price inflation, that minimum cutoff is 100 million US dollars. What do you think, Brett?
Well, look, Canada has about 560 or so of these centi-millionaires. And if you look at primarily where they're coming from, tech is a big driver of that. So these are usually tech founders and entrepreneurs who have had big exits, and they've been able to accumulate huge wealth because of it. I think the important thing that you just said right there was how the definition of what the centi-millionaire category used to be versus what it is today. It really just shows you the explosion in economic growth, especially on the asset price side, that we've seen over the past decade. And it all ties back into what we were talking about before. We live in a system that is designed around boom and bust. And so while we had a huge growth period over these past 10 years, I think this may be starting to be shaken up a bit.
Also interesting, you mentioned this, so the list is dominated by boomers, but we are seeing a growing number of younger tech founders joining the ranks. Brett, do you think we'll be seeing, you on that list anytime soon?
And I got to figure out how to buy a house in Toronto first. That's the first step. Once we go there, then we can start working our way up. But I think I got a long, long way to go. And so I feel like you got a better shot at that than me.
My fingers crossed for you, Brett. That is a pretty lofty goal, being able to purchase at this juncture in time in Toronto. And random fact, before we move on from centi-millionaires, the top things that centi-millionaires enjoy doing are apparently golf, number 1, and collecting art, number 2. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, soon you'll see pickleball on that list, and I'm sure what other trendy sport is on the rise.
I love pickleball. Okay, thank you very much for your time and your insight, as always, Brett. You can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It is available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.